under oath to our committee, specific things. It looks like 4 or 5 things that she said which were absolutely wrong, absolutely false, based on what Director Comey's investigation uncovered.
Well, where do we go from here? Where do you go from here? Anywhere at all?
I think right there.
Okay, that's what I was hoping you were saying. Okay.
He did not look at that. She said that every one of her emails was examined individually by her legal team. Mr. Comey said on Tuesday, not every one of her emails was examined by her legal team. She said she sent nothing marked or sent or received nothing marked classified. Mr. Comey said Tuesday and confirmed today that there were some emails that had markings that bore classified markings. She said she had one server. Mr. Comey said Tuesday that there were multiple servers. She said that she returned all work-related emails. Mr. Comey's investigation discovered that she did not return all work-related emails. So there are 4 false statements she made under oath, not just at some press event, under oath to a congressional committee in a investigation approved by the House of Representatives to look at the deaths of 4 Americans in the Benghazi situation. So I think that's where this moves next.
Okay, and so for the rest of us, when we look at Comey, and often, really, we've always had a good, tremendous amount of respect for him in the past, we all walked away from this just scratching our heads. We can't make sense of it. We really can't.
Yeah.
I mean, they're already calling this, they're referring to this as the Hillary defense, and defense lawyers know in the future will be using this, for those of us who don't share her stature, and using that into consideration. But why? I mean, can you give us anything to chew on out here, because we are dumbfounded by this. We really are.
Yeah, one of the things I raised, and of course he said this was not the case, but I think an average American looks at this and we wonder. He talked about the context of the person's action for his decision to say he wasn't going to take this to a grand jury. Now, never mind the fact that there are lots of prosecutors who said they look at this fact pattern, they look at this evidence, and they said, yeah, I would take that to a grand jury. I think there's probable cause to take that to a grand jury. He said he wouldn't. He said one of the factors that helped him in making that determination was the context of the person's action.
Right.
But when you use the word context, and that's typically not something you hear on the front end from a prosecutor. You hear it at the tail end of a case from a defense lawyer when they're talking about the sentencing phase after someone's already been found guilty. And I think some Americans are wondering, does context mean the context of the idea that, this was the former First Lady, the former Secretary of State, former Senator, major party's nominee for president? Does context include the fact that her husband, pretty important American, actually just met with the guy that Mr. Comey works for, the Attorney General Lynch, just a few days ago on a tarmac in Arizona? I mean, that gives some context to it too, and you have to wonder. And I think I think even Director Comey would admit people have to wonder about all that and how that all took place and how it all happened. So, again, we'll see as we move forward. I do think, though, this idea that she made false statements under oath, it looks to me like 4 at least from back in the hearing in October. I think that's something we've got to look at.
So when you say we have to look at it, what will that entail? Can you tell us? What does that mean?
Well,
I mean,
it may mean the Justice Department has to take a look at it.
All right.
It may mean that. And frankly, I don't know why they didn't look at that. Chairman Chafetz asked those questions today.
Right.
Did you look at the fact she gave false statements? What appears to be false statements under oath. I don't think you have to use the word appear. I think she just did give false statements under oath. Did you look at that? And he said he didn't. I don't know why you wouldn't examine. I don't think there's anything that would preclude you from examining the person you're investigating relative to the email situation and classified information and statements she made to a congressional committee on that very topic about her email and server arrangement, because that's exactly what I was asking her about when she made the statement that we now know are false.
Do you buy that she was just not sophisticated enough for all this?
No, I thought Mr. Meadows' testimony or questioning was very good.
Yes.
Not sophisticated. This family has been in the American public life and in the political world for a long time, probably than just about any other family in currently involved in American politics and in our government. So that's a little tough to figure that's actually the case. I don't think it is.
I don't think it is either. One thing I have to say to you is that how much we appreciate that we can count on you to get to the bottom of things and to really be looking out for the American people. And we get that sense from you, Representative Jordan. We truly do out here. And we appreciate you for being that person. And Well, we go forward, and we have to from this. I think the American people just, I mean, they're seeing that, that this is a double standard. And you were alluding to this earlier when we were talking about considering the context of the person's actions. And we see that. And I think that that discourages many, many Americans. And I hope they remember that when they either go to vote this November or decide to stay home because they don't like Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, you're right. Ultimately, we the people decide how things get handled on Election Day. But again, it is troublesome to see this fact pattern and the fact that the director even said this is not to assume that this wouldn't mean repercussions and consequences for people who do the same sort of thing in the future, which just sort of seems like, well, that seems strange because you go through this, all that she did, it's almost like conscience of guilt. There's this concept in the law that there's conscience of guilt when you take actions that demonstrate that, like deleting all the emails that you didn't turn over to the government and then scrubbing your devices so that no complete forensic recovery could take place. Well, that sure sounds like you're hiding something. And I think it's logical for a juror or anyone to kind of, the inference drawn from that is, look, people don't do that if they didn't do anything wrong, if they're not trying to hide something. And if that doesn't go towards this idea that Mr. Comey talked a lot about today, that there has to be intent, they had to be thinking of doing this. The whole fact that they set this arrangement up, they had a conversation where Ms. Abedin testified at her deposition that it was designed so that none of her personal information would ever get public. Was that trying to, so she could avoid any type of request that came in a FOIA or request that maybe came from Congress? I mean, sure looks that way. Sure
and that's why we all say when he, and he didn't have to address us. He didn't have to go into detail, in terms of what they found, but he did, which is unusual, quite frankly, in a situation like this. Then he gives us that punch to the gut, and we're scratching our heads out here. Why? I mean, we can't find a reasonable explanation here as to why he would not recommend criminal charges be filed against Hillary Clinton. None of us, we can't. Can you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, like I said, lots of prosecutors have been on shows just like this, radio shows and TV shows this week saying they would have taken it to a grand jury. And like many have said, you don't get, intent doesn't get spelled out. You never typically get an email or a letter or some statement where I'm going to go do something bad today. It just doesn't work that way. You have to show through the action that they took, it shows they intended to do this. And again, when you have people covering up things, deleting emails that they decided on, I was her legal team, Cheryl Mills, Heather Samerson Davis, that legal team, Cheryl Mills actually was also her chief of staff. They decided, okay, these are the ones we're going to give to the government, give back to congressional committees and the State Department, and these are the ones that we're going to keep. And Mr. Comey's already said some of what they kept was work-related, so they didn't turn it over, and then they deleted those, and then they erased their devices as well. That's sure. I think a logical person would say, wait a minute, that's not the kind of activity that people who have nothing to hide engage in. That's typically what people who are trying to not have evidence come forward, that's the kind of activity they engage in.
You would think. Exactly. Well, again, I have to say thank you for all that you do. I really appreciate you, and I know that the audience does as well. Keep up the good work. Thanks for joining us this afternoon on short notice. We appreciate it.